All right, I'll say I bid you greetings this evening of your time as you create time to exist. I will not ask you how you are, for I know that you are all perfect, a perfect reflection of whatever it is you are expressing in any given moment. Allow me to begin this interaction with the following entitlement, response, able. We have been discussing many things with members of your society for what you call many years of your time, and most recently have endeavored in that sense to simplify the information that we share with you so that it is both accessible and implementable or usable. Therefore, most recently, the many concepts that we have discussed from many angles have been broken down into but 3 simple categories. In that sense, you, in creating your own reality in each and every moment, always do some form of the following. You make a decision about who you are in any given moment. You base that decision on many different ideas. Often individuals will, in that sense, base that decision on external circumstance. I am this person because this has occurred to me. Often individuals will base that decision on what you call feedback from what you consider to be other individuals. I am this person because everyone tells me so all the time, so I must be. And most recently, we have discussed with you the option of having that decision simply be a reflection, a statement of who you know and prefer yourself to be. For only you truly know you, and the decision that you make will determine your experience that will then seem to support the decision that you make. Once you make that decision in any given moment, in every given moment, in fact, you then trust that decision till you change it. Trusting that decision can also be defined through the idea of maintaining that decision. If you commit to the decision and allow yourself to maintain it, you are performing the expression of trust in the initial decision. What we also discuss is that in the way that you create your reality, step 3, if you wish to call them steps, are that you then take an action in your reality. Though you are fundamentally infinite beings, you are exploring the idea you call linear reality, which creates the apparency of what you call before, during, and after. When you are, shall we say, playing your reality and expressing it through the idea of linear means, actions that you take are the hub, are your most visible expression that seem to create a cascading effect, a cascading series of what you call causes and effects that then seem to create your reality physically. Understand the following distinction between what you call actuality and what you call apparency. The actuality, if you will, is the idea that you are multidimensional, infinite, and eternal beings. The apparency that you create to explore yourselves in a very finite, discrete way is the idea that you are linear beings. You are born, you live, and you die, and that is it. Often as you begin to entertain the actuality of the idea that you are infinite beings, you begin to express more and more of the infinite potential that lies within you. Because your approach in exploring linear reality is to explore your reality as a seeming series of events, you create your reality, so to speak, as a gradient from what you call the infinite. And therefore, you generally will gauge your experience along what you call a gradient. Therefore, though the actuality is that you create your reality 100% in every given moment, the apparency would seem to be that you do not have complete control over your entire reality. The porthole that allows you to begin along the line of the gradient to express yourself consciously is the idea you call action. If you wish to insist that you do not have complete control over your entire reality, you may understand that playing with the gradient that you create, you do have complete control over one thing, your action. Whatever action you take in any given moment, which we will refer to also for the purposes of this interaction as your response. You always have complete control over your response, the action that you put out in your reality. In that sense, you assess your reality. You make decisions about it, and then you respond. And it is this response that you have total control over in every given moment. Therefore, the way that you experience this gradient increasing of expressing yourself consciously and creating your reality according to preference is by first gauging your response, by first allowing your response to be reflective of your decision, by allowing your actions to reflect, to express the decision that you make about yourself. You always do this anyway, as you say, somewhat automatically. But the idea is once you become aware of how you express your reality, once you become aware of the methodology through which you create your own reality, you then allow yourself the option of doing so consciously. We have discussed in detail the idea of having the decision that you make be conscious. We have discussed in detail the idea that maintaining that decision can also be a conscious choice. Continuing to make the decision about yourself that is representative of who you prefer yourself to be, who you know yourself to be, rather than what everyone says you should be, and what, in that sense, your reality seems to dictate you already are. And therefore, conscious choice comes into play. Because, again, you express yourself on a gradient, you have a tendency not to automatically and immediately transform the entire face of your reality in such an instantaneous way. You play with the gradient. You play with the idea of unfurling yourself a bit at a time. Again, the apparency is that it is your actions that create the series of events that eventually position your physical life to be the life that you desire. Now, as we have mentioned, you can spontaneously, in any given moment, transform your entire reality completely. But you have, again, a tendency not to do so for very specific reasons. The reasons are to maintain the degree of focus that you have chosen to express as a physical being. And therefore, rather than forsaking yourself because some portion, as you sometimes break yourself up into, seems to decide that you will not transform immediately, you can still play with the idea you call your response, for you are always able in any given moment to gauge your response, to choose what it is that you do. Again, as a being that would seem to create a separation between your perception, what you take in from your reality, and your action or response, what you put out, in general, you will go through the following motions. You will perceive your reality, generally through what you call your senses. You will then place an interpretation upon that perception. Then you will respond. I do not necessarily mean the emotional reaction that you create. When I say response, I am specifically referring to you eventually do something with the information. you eventually act. This is where your power lies if you have chosen to create the idea of transforming on a gradient. Now, it is very easy to see whether you have chosen to transform on a gradient or not in what you call a higher self level. Simply, if you close your eyes, decide that everything around you will transform, and you open your eyes and many things still seem the same, so to speak, you can assume that you have chosen the gradient path. And you can use the path that you have chosen rather than forsake it by gauging your response, for you are always able to respond and have complete control over your response if you are willing to acknowledge that and express that, as opposed to have your decision be that your response, your actions are automatic, they're out of your control, and then place the plethora of explanations as to why your response is out of your control. It is my ego. It is my tendency. It is my habits. These are things that you create as ideas to create literally an excuse that your response is not conscious and purposeful. But always, if you are completely willing to acknowledge yourself, can you understand in any given moment that your response is up to you. When you perceive an event or a circumstance and then interpret that event or circumstance, because you create the apparency that the action is what it is that transforms the reality, in a sense you create a buffer so that not every single random thought that you have becomes a reality, therefore making your life seem like a random series of events. By using the action as a gradient, you give yourself more finely tuned control from the many thoughts, the many ideas, the many explorations that occur to you in perception, to only express ones purposefully, and only have the ones that you choose and express purposefully have a result in your life. And this is how you gauge your actions, utilizing the apparency that your actions create your own reality. In actuality, as you say, thoughts are things, but the apparency that you are using to create in a very focused way is that it is the action that corresponds from those thoughts that actually moves the reality in a linear way. Therefore, again, rather than forsaking yourselves constantly, you can simply gauge your response. You are response able. You are response enabled. And simply by realizing this, that is all it takes to begin to do so. So by all means, you can continue to perceive your reality. You can continue to initially interpret your reality according to habits, some of which may be negative. But if you are willing to withhold action until you realign to the positive decision of who you are, you give yourself the opportunity through that buffer to only have very specific positive results. The idea that action creates the reality, again, is apparency, but it is an apparency that you create for a reason. In every given moment, the actuality is that whoever you decide you are that person. But the apparency that you create, again, for the purposes of focus and purposefulness, is the idea that the action that you then take will physically create in the physical reality. Therefore, that is where your power lies. If you are choosing to exist and create and express your reality from the gradient of action, thereby you give back to yourself your power. For even if your initial assessment of a situation, interpretation of a situation is negative, if you are willing to not immediately act with that negative foundation, if you are willing to remind yourself, realign yourself to who you know yourself to be, and then respond, then act, You then create the apparency of total control of your reality. Not in how the circumstances play out, but in how you respond. Because one of the things that you are exploring is the idea of hiding part of yourself from all of yourself so that you can experience the apparency that you learn, that you grow, and that things are unexpected. It is part of the gradient that you are creating that circumstances that come into your perception will be from time to time unexpected. But when your actions that arise from these circumstances are positive, are aligned to your decision, are aligned with who you know yourself to be, then only can the results of those actions generate positive physical circumstance and results. The key is continuity and persistence in having that be an unbroken approach, an unbroken series of actions, an unbroken series of actions that are reflective of your positive decision and your positive trust in that decision about who you know yourself to be. And therefore, if you are willing to restrain, so to speak, yourself from acting until you are realigned flawlessly, consistently, persistently, and all of your actions are positively aligned to your decision, then your reality, even along the very gradient that you are creating, transforms extremely quickly and seemingly miraculously. For you are now in alignment with who you say you are. You are now expressing yourself consciously according to preference. Once again, you begin to do this without interrupting yourself, so to speak. Nothing is truly an interruption. But when you insert actions which are based on a negative foundation, which are negative actions, negative interactions with other people, negative responses to your reality, then each of those actions will seem, along the gradient, the apparency that you create, to also have an effect, quote unquote, down the line. So, the apparency when your actions are not gauged and consistently positive, or that things that happen to you are not consistently positive. Oh, everything is going so well, you say. Then the first sign of something coming up that would seem to be negative, many of you, as you say, to use your vernacular, cave. You cave in and say, oh, it doesn't work. Not realizing that that negative seeming circumstance is a direct result to an action that you have taken because you are, in a sense, playing along the gradient, the apparency that the actions have a momentum, that the actions are causal and effectual. And so therefore, again, your result becomes scattered, random. If you are willing to gauge your response, which means you can have any initial reaction, perception to anything that is occurring in your reality, but simply do not act on it. Simply remind yourself of who you are and then act. And perhaps be completely willing to not act at all until you realign. Then your actions will become an unbroken series of expressions, positive expressions of who you say you are. And again, one of the rules that you create through the apparency gradient of action is what you call actions speak louder than what you call words. One way to put it, in breaking this down and still keeping it simple, is that your action, your response in any given moment is the strongest expression of whichever belief you are expressing in that moment. So if you allow your action to be automatically a result of a negative perception, you are expressing in your reality, physically, a negative belief. It is not that beliefs happen to you, as I have reminded you many times. You contain all beliefs, all, the belief and its opposite. But what determines the response, the reaction, the creation in your life is which one you act on. The one you act on in that given moment is telling you, of all the beliefs that I contain, I am expressing this one. Your action is the direct reflection of your strongest belief in the moment that you are performing that action, no matter what you say. Therefore, your ability to respond consciously, your responsibility, is your power and is the simple key, the simple fulcrum to allow you to apply the knowledge that you have attracted up till this point in your life. More accurately, it is the knowledge that you already contained and are now willing to express. But perhaps the missing link, the puzzle piece, the key for which many of you say you search, is the idea of being willing to withhold your response, your action in a given moment, until you are positively aligned. Now, to give you an idea, even along the gradient of cause and effect, doing something and getting an effect, of how short a time, even with a gradient, that you can transform your entire life visibly, is what you call 3 weeks of your time. If you wish to get what you call proof of this idea, you can see absolutely compelling reflections by merely being willing to be consistently positively aligned in your actions for a mere 3 days of your time. Therefore, many of you say over and over and over and over and over and over and over again that you desire to create the life that you prefer, that you desire to express yourself in your reality and have an impact in your reality. The key to doing so along the gradient, assuming that you haven't made the decision and seen your reality miraculously change in that moment, is this idea of allowing your actions to only be purposeful. You have an expression, count to 10. Individuals will sometimes use this expression to not immediately act from impulse, as you say. Generally, impulse, by the way, can be interpreted. One way to interpret it in the negative is to have an immediate reactionary response rather than a purposeful actionary response. And your idea counting to 10 merely creates a gap, an artificial gap, between the idea of immediate, impulsive, negative action and the idea of realigning to who you are. For generally speaking, for most of you, it can take a mere 10 seconds or 30 seconds to realign to who you are in almost every given situation. Therefore, another way to look at this is just as important as your willingness to act according to who you know yourself to be, is your willingness to refrain from acting until your foundational decision and trust is realigned to the you prefer to be, not the you that you say may be so undesirable, for those of you that say that. Your power on a plate, that is it. You are able to gauge that response. When you begin to have your action, to have your response be conscious, continuously, consistently, and begin to, in that sense, observe a contiguous positive result. You will still create the idea of the unexpected. You will still create the idea of surprise. You will still create the idea that things come up that perhaps was not exactly what you had prepared for. But every single instance of that particular idea, things happening unexpectedly, are then interpreted by you, when you are willing to act in this way, joyously. I, in acting who I am, expected this to happen, but this is coming up instead, and because I know I am committed to who I am and my actions reflect it, this is blatantly more obviously beneficial for me than anything I had preconceived should happen now to allow me to express myself fully. And thereby, you begin to perceive and interpret unexpected circumstance and results in a very positive and anticipating way. When you do that, there is nothing that can seem to creep in there, for everything is part of the process and not an interruption in it. Now, as I have, again, often shared, you already do this. Always have. What we are discussing now is doing it consciously. When I say you've already been doing this, I mean you always decide, this is who I am, no matter what your criteria is. You always trust in that decision till you change it, and you always respond with that decision as a foundation. So we are not discussing doing anything new. Perhaps the approach is new, perhaps the purposefulness, perhaps the focusing and maintaining a conscious focus of who you are may appear or feel new. But you have always done this anyway, and any result that you are experiencing is automatically the result of that approach, which you have expressed so perfectly your whole entire life, and, if you wish to get technical, your whole entire existence. Often, responsibility in your reality can be negatively interpreted as blame. I am responsible. I am to blame. That is one way to put it. But that is not an empowering, acknowledging, self-expressive way to understand it. And when you decide, I am to blame, you have made a decision. Built into that decision, implicated by that decision, is that you are a negative person, that you have done something wrong, that you cannot change, that you are a habitual being, and therefore, by extension, that your actions are completely out of your control, or maybe only partially in your control. But you need not have blame as response able. Your ability to respond means no matter what you have done, no matter who you have been, you can choose yourself anew in any given moment, and you can use that ability to respond positively if you have done something negative in your past that allows you, through the fact that you know that is not representative of who you now choose to be, to align to the positive idea of who you are. And therefore, nothing that you have done, no matter how negative, is extraneous. Everything that you have done can be used to reinforce a positive decision about who you are. Therefore, responsibility can be interpreted in the most empowered way, which is you have full and complete command, conscious command over what you put out in your life. And whatever vibration you are being when you put something out is the result you seem to get back along this apparency gradient. Now, the actuality is that once you make the decision, you are the vibration of that decision. You are that person. The apparency that you create is that you first must perform an action to cause the series of events to create the evidence of being that person. Using the apparency and beginning to act consciously and getting the results of those conscious actions begins to drive your consciousness back into what you call the moment, the now moment. The willingness to be who you are consciously, to respond as that person, and to begin to get the results of that person also have the effect of having your consciousness seem to slide back into the moment where you can begin to lift the apparency and begin to experience the actuality that when you merely make the decision, the whole reality changes. One of the ways in order to explain the apparency to you of the gradient is, in a sense, you play the game of proving what I am saying to yourself, and once you have proven it, you, in a sense, create yourself to be more completely expressive in the moment. This is one of the ways that we endeavor to explain to you why there is still the apparency that you have the middleman or woman of action. And you can use whatever apparency you create in a positive way. Because you may feel, I do not have control over the people that I interact with. I do not have control over having to pay the rent tomorrow and not having the money. What do I have control over? What you have, again, according to expressing yourself on this gradient, is your response in any given moment from what is available for you to act upon. And that is your door. That is your key. That is your missing link. There is your puzzle piece. That fulcrum, that ability. When you begin to express yourself in this way, and notice initially that you still may perceive an event, a circumstance, a relationship in a negative way, or perceive something and interpret it in a negative way, you will understand through your willingness to withhold your action until you realign that no matter what you are thinking in that circumstance, it is only the action that you perform that has the result. And you will see that you can have an initial negative reaction, and by being willing to have a positive action, get a positive result, even though you may seem to have a tendency to still create negative interpretations. Once you see in action that responding positively, no matter what your initial interpretation is, creates a positive result, you will immediately begin to see the transformation of your interpretation to not necessarily be so initially negative. Often individuals will judge themselves very harshly because their initial reaction, interpretation of their perceived reality is negative. But when you begin to again withhold your actions, realign, and have the actions be a positive expression, you can see how that need not in any way hold you back. And you create the evidence that because you are willing to act in a positive way, those interpretations are no longer relevant. Those interpretations are dated stuff. Your willingness to act purposefully transforms your tendency to interpret your reality in a specific way, and replaces your tendency to interpret your reality with a positive interpretation, knowing that no matter what the reality seems to present, you will only perform a positive action, only get a positive result, and therefore the circumstance in and of itself cannot be inherently negative. And therefore the approach of initially labeling things negative melts away, becomes completely irrelevant to the you that you are consciously expressing rather than simply entertaining. When you begin to explore the idea of expanding your consciousness and creating consciously, many of you entertain the possibility of that idea that your life can be a conscious expression. But until your actions reflect that, it is only merely an entertainment. When your actions reflect that and get the corresponding results, you create the physical evidence that supports the idea that it is far beyond simply entertaining, that you create your reality and that you are an infinite being expressing yourself in finite terms. And when you are willing to gauge your actions accordingly, all the evidence becomes supportive of the positive decision, rather than a reflection of indecision, or a reflection of the apparency that your reality is a reactive event rather than a proactive event. Is this clear? All right. You don't sound too excited about it. Perhaps you have not yet grasped the simplicity of what I am saying. Or perhaps you are still rather attached to the idea of random events, random effects, polarity experience. That is all right. That is all well and good, for you always set your own pace. And therefore, nobody will rush you into exploring more of yourself, nor can anyone slow you down when you decide to. Your willingness to grasp that though your reality is quite complex, the living of yourself, the expressing of yourself can be rather simple, is a very useful idea when you begin to transform who you are. For because you are always deciding, I am this person, I trust I am this person, and my actions now will, in that sense, reflect, express that person. Again, we are not sharing with you something that you need to practice at, or something that you need to develop an expertise in. You are all consummate experts at creating your own reality randomly. Congratulations. However, you do often attract interactions, such as interactions with ourselves, but any interactions that reflect your willingness to look beyond what you call the status quo, because you are now ready to express more of yourself. And so we are discussing most specifically what is meant by expression, which is your response. Therefore, by all means, if it is attractive to you to express your reality in positive terms, create the life that you prefer and desire, by all means, explore the idea that I am sharing with you, using the facilities you have already exercised and masterfully employed. To sum it all up, your willingness to gauge your response according to aligning with your most positive self is the profound approach along a gradient, utilizing linear reality rather than attempting to transcend it in order to escape it, in a very simple way, purposefully, employing the idea of your conscious commandment. This is who I am, just because I know myself better than anyone else. This is who I am. Therefore, a person who is this person has a particular approach, has a particular response. And if you are willing to align to your most positive understanding of who you are, you will find out just how creative you are in any given situation to respond in the most loving and positive way, assuming assuming that what you choose to experience in your life is a loving and positive result. Perhaps some of you wish something else. When you put out that action, create that vibration of positivity, of givingness, of lovingness, that is what you get back, and that is what many of you say you desire. Therefore, when you see what seems to be coming back in your direction, you can also use that to look at your actions, not to assign blame, not to judge yourself, but simply to observe that perhaps, maybe, in certain given situations, your response is not always reflective of your most empowered version of who you are, and may, in fact, be, perhaps, just perhaps occasionally, a bit disempowered. Once you realize what you are doing, you can do something else. Or you can simply bypass the analysis and only do what it is that is representative of who you decide you are. Though we have broken this down, decision, trust, and action, into three components for the purposes of elucidating and explaining and defining the mechanism that you create your reality, you will begin to find that they are truly one event. The decision, the trust, is always expressed as the action. And therefore, the action, while you are creating in this way, is perhaps, again, the most important thing to be mindful of at this point. To take the next step, perhaps in many ways, the final step of expanding your consciousness into expressing yourself in preferred terms, according to your desire, according to your excitement, expressing your knowingness that everything is one integrated expression that is you. For your willingness to allow me to interact with you, I thank you. And understand, again, by means of slightly clarifying, that your response, your action, can also be the thing you say. When you say something, that is an action. That is a response. And because, at least at this point in the way that you express yourself as physical beings, you rely on verbal communication quite heavily. What you say is representative of who you are being in that moment. When we say gauge your response, you can also choose to apply that response to what you say. This is what we do as a matter of course. Everything is conscious. And therefore, the action that I would seem to perform in these interactions is, quote unquote, verbally, and on the many levels that we create this interaction, interact with you. It is the expression of who I am, perhaps for now, in the only form that you will allow yourself to see. But I remind you that I only exist within you from your point of view. And therefore, anything that I say is something that you are now reflecting very consciously, very blatantly, back to yourself. You get the credit. And your willingness to use whatever external reflection you attract as an example of the way in which you can create your reality in a positive way is one of the creative ways that you attract what you call tools and resources. Not that what we are saying is any better than any other approach you have ever had or anything that you are doing. We simply represent one of the reflections that you create from yourself to yourself that incorporates the idea of expanding into a more joyful expression of who you know yourself to be. Because at least for me, from my part of this interaction, that is what I represent. A being who chooses joy. A being who chooses full experience, full committed expression, positive output, positive experience, positive perception and interpretation. And therefore, whatever reflection that you attract, which is only you speaking back to yourself in elaborately removed terms, by all means, utilize that resource. You will begin to find when you put this out, almost every single direction will spit that back, so to speak, to you. Individuals may seem to change, but it is truly you expressing yourself differently and therefore attracting the reflections that reinforce, that support that reflection. And that is why, because this is the particular methodology through which linear reality expresses itself, and you have chosen to explore the idea of linear reality, action, willingness to act consciously represents the fulcrum. Therefore, for your willingness to interact with me, I ask you now how, by way of sharing between us, we may mutually be of service and reflection to each other. Sharing.
Elan?
Female.
Elan, when I'm having a lucid dream or I'm meditating, is there a way I could figure out the difference between a future probability in this timeline versus another one so that I could react more appropriately?
The idea is to be spontaneous in the moment rather than need to prepare. The idea of preparation is a rigid approach that does not allow for the unexpected to come to your aid, does not allow for the unexpected to actually be the shortest, shall I say, point or path between 2 points. So if you feel the need to prepare, by all means, that is one methodology through which you can do that. But because one of the ideas you are very strongly choosing to buy into is the unexpected being, in a way, or in that way, a joyous reminder, a joyous reflection of another possibility, that may be counterproductive in that way. Do you understand what I am saying?
Yes, I do.
Now also understand that when you need to know, when that will be the most conducive thing, once you are expressing yourself consistently, consciously, then it will simply be absolutely evident this particular meditation, this lucid dream, represents absolutely to me the fulcrum through which I will align my consciousness and then approach. It will serve that purpose no matter what then comes up. If you are willing, if something should come up that is unexpected, to still use that and not so rigidly insist that it must be any particular way.
Thank you. That clears it out.
Oh, thank you for clearing it up.
Well,
Sharing, yes, Mail.
do you think you could share with the group today some of your personal memories, or if they're vague, historical accounts of your own civilization's transformation from third to fourth density?
Well, briefly, not to put it out, but there are many things to discuss this evening. Our particular approach never started out being quite as removed from the idea of ourselves as your own. So therefore, it would seem from your perspective that there was less to transform. We already flowed in that sense in tandem, in alignment, basically speaking, with perhaps what you might refer to as the nature upon our planet, the approach and interactions of the interpersonal relationships of our peoples. How it did play out because of the fact that there was very little removal already is that our transformation basically did last what you might consider to be but 3 days. And again, the apparency may be that we fell asleep and woke up as a mass, as a society. But the idea is that that was simply, again, in alignment with our already existing tendency to express ourselves slightly less removed in that sense. Does that answer the question?
So you already had an understanding of the connection to the whole, then there wasn't as much separation of the self.
Yes, but there still was some idea of, perhaps you can say, slightly more separated idea. But perhaps if you were to understand our consciousness previous to what you would call our transformation or our mass transformation, it would be similar to many of the ancient peoples upon your planet that existed in harmony with the nature of your planet. The transformation in many ways represented the idea of going to the next level, which then also allowed us to explore and express, even physically, perhaps what you might refer to as more advanced technology, but never was our idea of technology separate from nature, for we understand ourselves to be an expression of nature, and therefore anything that we express also, by extension, by definition, must also be nature.
It wasn't as much of a quantum leap of consciousness, changing of technologies, ability all of a sudden to be able to manipulate time and space in a much more profound manner than prior to the transformation. It was more subtle. Is that
more subtle, but from our point of view, still quite startling, still quite abrupt, and still quite, shall I say, seeming to create new possibilities where possibilities did not exist before?
was there resistance in your own society to the changes that were taking place?
Not really, no. Any individual that would create such an idea of resistance would simply create an offshoot parallel reality, and we would not seem to interact with them to be aware that they made a different decision.
Was there understanding as to what we were going through?
What we were going through? Yes, absolutely.
On a mass consciousness level, there wasn't a knowing and an understanding that
There was what you call understanding. There was, to some degree, what you would seem to interpret as an expectancy, an event, and then the idea of, perhaps you can say, an unleashing of more of ourselves. Now, this is not truly, even though I have defined it in these terms, that much different from how you also transform. But the idea is, because our mass approach was more similar and your mass approach is more diverse, it seems as though it is a greater transformation to you. But from our point of view, it was just as marvelous, wonderful, and, may I say, advantageous.
it's going to take us more than 3 days.
That is obviously your decision. And should you continue to maintain that decision and express it through action, then yes, I will concur. But should you perhaps decide to express yourself for only 3 days, that is why I mentioned that number, and that is why there is the commonality of that number, you can see what I am saying in no uncertain terms. And perhaps one of the only differences in acceptability is that because of the way that you have created your own selves in this sense, because of the degree of removal that you sometimes perceive that you have created, 3 weeks would seem to be more representative of what would be a crux for a personal individual. But 3 days, immediate and obvious physical events are in place that allow you to, as you sometimes refer to it, create a momentum. Though again, that is an apparency. All right?
Elan?
Mail over there.
Elan, some time ago, I just did what you said. I transformed.
All right, congratulations. Next sharing. I already do, but share it with everyone else by all means.
At one time, I was diagnosed as someone that could not drink unless they started drinking. And I woke up one morning and I said, "No, I don't like it. I will no longer be an alcoholic."
You mean to tell me you changed your decision? How risque.
But I didn't say I would never drink again. I said I would never be drunk again.
All right. Same thing.
Boy, see, I'm going back to that because I'd like to transform more myself.
Well, by all means, go ahead.
Well, it was so simple and so easy just to say that and then to do that.
So you have already had some what you call experience, proving to yourself, so to speak, that simplicity is an option, yes?
Yeah.
All right. Can you then see how what we have discussed would apply to your situation now? If you simply trust who you are and gauge your actions accordingly, rather than say, I am this person, and for some percentage of the time have your actions reflect that, and then other times say, I am this person, but yet your actions reflect a more disempowered interpretation, then you can do exactly what you are saying across the board of your life rather than in one specialized area. That is all there is to it. Perhaps, again, to simply gauge this to your own specific vernacular, trusting your intuition, but not saying you trust your intuition, acting as though you trust it. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
All right. Are you willing, in that sense, to do that? Are you willing to respond only according to your most positive representation of who you are, no matter what your interpretation is in any given moment? Be willing to withhold your action until you are realigned.
Yes.
All right, then I will see you sooner than you might imagine.
That coincides with my dream last night.
Oh, what an accident.
No accident.
Ah, all right. Do proceed.
The dream was I was going to go onto the turnpike, and I missed the turn to go south.
Ah, unexpected circumstance. Proceed. What did you do?
Well, I did it 3 times. I realized slow down so you can make the turn where you want to go.
Ah, thank you. You have your foot on the accelerator of your life. And sometimes, again, to utilize the example, putting on the brakes before you make the turn, it may be the only way to realign with where it is you know you wish to be.
Thank you very much. Nice talking with you again.
Always. I thank you as well and remind you, you have done it all. Your willingness to have your actions reflect your desires, your ideas, your inspirations. Then have your actions be your expirations as well. I thank you.
Elan.
Hey, Ismail.
Greetings
And to you. Good day.
to all of you guys.
All right. How about the women?
Yeah.
All right.
Several years ago, you gave us something called the Harmonic Wave Template, which relates to the idea of planetary transformation.
All right.
Now, yours only took 3 days, which was pretty quick.
So can yours, as I have shared, if you are willing to commit to it and not rely upon the necessity that everyone else do the same. Our transformation was in tandem because our civilization functioned more cohesively. But this is not a weakness of your society. The advantage is that you can do so personally, and then you will create the apparency or the idea that so has everyone else, rather than relying on the company, so to speak. Do proceed.
Well, I'm very interested in the idea you've expressed to us before called template metaphysics, where the harmonic wave template plots out how third density planets such as ours go through their transformational phase where they end cycle on the old game in order to start a new game. And this harmonic wave template plots out an 80-year cycle complete with trigger points and cultural events in the symbolic cultural events in our culture. And the first one was back in 1947, and the symbolic event was the Roswell crash. And then in 67, we had Star Trek came out.
Oh, Star Trek. All right.
And then in 87, we had the harmonic convergence, as we labeled it, or the midpoint convergence, which was sort of like at the midpoint of this 80-year cycle, which I've sort of dubbed the cyberspace convention, or the cyberspace convergence,
All right.
where we're all getting together on the internet and sort of converging as harmoniously as we can. And then the whole template would then... in 2017, you gave what you called the harmonic identification.
All right. May I ask you a question before you proceed?
Yes.
Do understand that many of these explanations were very specifically geared to allow people to turn keys, open up doors, expand their acceptability of expressing themselves in more empowered terms. Many individuals require steps, processes, explanations. Do you desire? You personally, I am asking now, so your answer can be representative of who you are, to wait till that year to have that effect.
I'm all for transforming now.
Ah, all right. Go right ahead.
I will. I'm part of that symbolic thing for me is
By the way, before you proceed again, that is a societal tendency. And as I have reminded you about the idea of predictions, which are simply a sensing of the energy that is present in the moment of what is most likely to occur if things stay according to that seeming path, that merely the sharing of the prediction, merely the introduction of the idea, generally will serve to change the outcome. So therefore, that is still a tendency, a possibility, but it is not necessary by any means that your experience need follow any particular template. And when you are willing to transform, all bets are off in any particular template, which was situation specific to something which may no longer be representative of who you are being. Do you understand?
Yes.
So by all means, use the tool, particularly if you wish to prolong yourself that long, or if it is a methodology through which you feel you can communicate with other individuals, by all means, you can have them in agreement to take that long as well. Or you can simply use the inspiration that you derive from any tool, including that one, and create that now. And again, in terms of that schedule, all bets are off. And that template becomes less relevant to you and the expression of your reality. Still, it will be relevant to another reality. You need not worry.
Thank you. My decision is to wake up now.
All right.
And I like to fool around with templates and these things.
All right.
Oh,
But do understand that many of these templates create more time, which is all well and good. I am not saying there are any shoulds as to when you might wish to express more of yourself. I am simply pointing out that if you fixate on an idea that is linearly dependent, you can fulfill your own prophecy in a way that may not completely be representative of your truest desire to express yourself right now.
I got it.
Is that all?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Sharing.
Elan.
All right. Duke it out, and whoever wins goes next.
What is the reason for choosing the biological unit that we represent?
All right. Apparently, you have won the duking. It is simply one expression through which you can experience your reality in a very specific, what you sometimes call sensorial way. It is a way to express yourself that puts in certain variables that allow you once again to explore, to seem to grow, to learn, to experience, and this is very key, things as if it were the first time. For as I have often stated, when you are all-knowing, all-seeing, infinite being, there is no idea of first time. Everything already exists. And so one way to understand it without getting that complicated is that the idea of surprise is irrelevant. The idea of learning is irrelevant. The idea of the joy of discovering is irrelevant because you already know it all. So that is the most basic common denominator idea as to why you choose this particular form. Now, whatever else occurs to you in addition to that can be your specific reason. But does that make sense?
To a certain degree, it does make sense. But
All
why
right.
did you choose your form? What was the compelling force for you to choose who you became? And what was the compelling force for me to choose who I become?
Well, you answered the question as far as you're concerned, and if you are willing to take responsibility, you can simply do so. I will answer from my end is simply that the particular physical form that I am expressing for what to me is right now is the most conducive to allow me to explore, to discover in a way that I can express myself most fully. Now, really, this is a trick question because it's the same answer for you too.
That's right. That's what I thought. That's exactly what I'm trying to do then.
Well, when you stop trying to do it and simply do it, that is the difference between gauging your response and reacting.
Thank you for reminding me of that.
All right, thank you for reminding yourself and using me as an excuse. Is that all?
Yeah, that's clear.
All right. We will pause for a short break of 10 to 15 minutes of your counting and resume contact with the other duker at that time. All right, I'll say, before we continue sharing, allow me to say the following. You have an expression in your vernacular. Say the first thing that comes to your mind. Perhaps when beginning to realign your approach in your reality toward positive expression of yourself and positive experience of your life, perhaps you just may wish to put that on hold. Do understand the following in terms of what you refer to as relationships, interpersonal relationships. Until your life is a living expression of your positive intention and positive expression, saying the first thing that comes to your mind may just be slightly counterproductive. This is not to discourage the idea of spontaneity. This is not to discourage the idea of spontaneous expression. Once indeed your approach is in alignment with your desires, preferences, and self-knowledge, then that very same trait, that very same approach will have quite a positive response and allow people to see in no uncertain terms that you know who you are and you mean what you say. And you are, again, a spontaneous emission in progress, by all means. But while you are realigning, should you decide there is any need to do so, saying the first thing that comes to your mind will often be a reactive response according to a, shall I say, slightly less constructive belief than your most empowered belief in any given situation. So gauging your response in interpersonal relationships to simply have it expressed in the simplest terms possible may be, again, inserting a pause before you respond should you find that your tendency in any given situation is to respond in a negative way. For needless to say, even your own observations in that sense will support what I am saying, that when you have a spontaneously negative emission in an interpersonal interaction, you invariably create a negative response from the other individual. And often you will even say, I did not mean to say that. But your actions, your response, which is in this case your words, did speak louder. You did say that, and in that moment at least, that is who you were. That response creates an effect. And in what you call relationship situations, it tends to be somewhat immediate and complete. For your relationships, what you call your close interpersonal relationships, will very closely mirror your response, very spontaneously and immediately. So to simply realign before you speak, particularly if your perception and your interpretation of what is being said to you is negative, is what allows you to stop, as you say, hitting the negative ball back into the other court. I understand that maybe this sounds too simple to be true. Maybe it sounds as though you are squelching in a given moment who you are. But this is only if who you are is ever fluctuating between conscious and automatic, between constructive and destructive. And when you put out something that is destructive, that is negative, that is negatively reactive, you will see it mirrored back to you in your reality. And therefore, the statement still stands that you control your response, which seems to control your perception of your reality. This goes for any relationship. If someone says something to you that you feel is most negative, that is their approach. If you decide who you are and you accept who you are, and part of that definition is that you wish a positive experience, if your output is positive no matter what, you will, to use again your own slang, diffuse any given situation. For only can the idea of argument, negative interaction, perpetuate if both, or as many individuals that are involved, continue to perpetuate their reflection, their expression. And therefore, you can always immediately see the effects of gauging your response in interpersonal relationships. You will understand that when you lash out, you are not functioning from a position of being comfortable with who you are. You are not functioning from a position of putting out a constructive reflection. And therefore, what you do put out is what you will seem to get back. And in fact, in that moment, if you put out negativity, you are being the vibration of negativity. And regardless of what the other person says, even if it would seem initially to not be negative, you may still interpret it in negative terms, because your response also, again, will determine your propensity to interpret a situation in a specific way. So if your usual approach is to respond negatively, your interpretation will be negative. If you shift that response, regardless of your initial interpretation, to be a positive response, you begin to then transform what you call the tendency, but what is actually a perpetuated choice, of interpreting what another person is saying, your circumstance, your surroundings, in negative terms. And that is what allows you to pivot, to transform, again, seemingly instantaneously, which you always do anyway. So perhaps this may just be one example of where holding your tongue may be most constructive, but not for too long. For once you realign, there will always be a positive response. And once you have paused to give yourself the opportunity to present to yourself that positive option, it will simply be compelling for you to express, to choose that option, because it is truly more representative of who you say you desire to be. And often the automatic response is simply not giving yourself the benefit of one single positive other option. Therefore, pausing before you act, pausing before you say anything, is very key to consciously realigning and creating anew rather than perpetuating, which is still creating anew, but the old negative reality. So therefore, there was, perhaps you can say, on my end, a sensing that it would be beneficial to address this as well. Perhaps it does not apply to any of you. If so, I apologize. Only kidding. Love means never having to say that. Proceed, Duker number 2. I don't think you are the Duker.
Who is?
I'll take it. I'll
Hey.
take it.
Elan.
Greetings, Elan.
All right. Apparently you're the new Duker. Proceed.
All right. Well, whoever duped out, I'm speaking now. That's all that matters.
All right.
It's funny because my question had something to do with what you just said, and it was about the idea of response. And I want to be a little bit more clear on this.
All right.
When I'm holding, let's say I get a bill in the mail. Okay, I I have a mental response that happens very, very quick.
All right, stop to simply file this into the categories we are discussing. You open an envelope. You perceive something, perhaps in this case, a bill. You then have an interpretation, which is what you are referring to as your response, but to simply allow this to be very clear, call it your interpretation. Your response is the thing you then do after you assess or interpret what that perception means to you. Now, you can automatically respond and say any expletive that comes to your mind, which is perhaps a negative response. Or you can look at it more carefully, more creatively, and say, all right, I understand on the surface this seems negative. I understand that everyone knows this is negative, but I'm a positive being. And therefore, even though there is the apparency that this is inherently negative, I know it is truly a neutral symbol. And I know that what I assign, as opposed to the initial interpretation, what I assign is the only thing that determines the effect. It is not the piece of paper with writing on it that gives the effect. It is my interpretation and then proceeding to assign meaning to that interpretation. If you allow yourself the possibility to realign to who you are, which I assume includes the idea of being positively abundant, before you respond, before you curse the universe, then you are now doing something different. You are having what may seem to be a repetitive symbol, but the only reason that it seems to repeat is you always have a similar response when you finally express something. Not just interpret it on the face, but then make an expression or then express yourself. So what is key using that example is to simply pause before you respond. If someone else is around, do not say anything to them. Realign to who you are. A person who is abundant and knows it and cannot pay the bill has a markedly different response than a person who feels that they are not abundant and the bill is simply a reinforcement of that idea. And it is that response which again seems, the apparency, the gradient, it seems to create the effect. So by not having a similar or same response to a similar or same seeming symbol, you change the momentum and literally change the significance of the very bill you are discussing.
Okay, I'm glad I asked that.
May I assume by that response that you do not understand or feel that what I am saying actually works?
It's perfect what you said.
Now, I understand that it may seem, all right, on the surface, that receiving the bill that you feel that you cannot pay, pausing a moment, realigning to who you are and having a positive response cannot possibly pay that bill. And that particular action in and of itself may not pay the bill. But it sets up a new series of results that may or may not directly have something to do with the bill. And it also sets up a new approach that will pay the bill.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I really do.
All right. But what?
Agree. I just am interested in the mental response because only from my own experience, if I see an envelope and I see that little thing up there on the left-hand side that says anybody that uses this for, gets fined $300 or imprisonment, I know it's from the IRS.
All right. Understood.
I haven't verbally said anything or really even created a thought. I just had this immediate response of fear.
That is why we drew the distinction that you perceive, you interpret, and those things in and of themselves do not seemingly create any result. It is the next step that creates the results in your life. And it is all right to have that reaction. That reaction, that initial interpretation, is reflective of the actions that you have performed up until now. And that is why your willingness to change the response, change the action, no matter what the corner of the envelope says, sets up a new template, sets up a new series of events, sets up a physical reality whereby suddenly and from some direction, often unexpected, you can next time pay it. And I understand that all of these things seem removed, but when you begin to perform the positive response continuously, you will begin to pick up a similar envelope. It is never the same envelope, and not have that initial interpretation. It is the tendency to act in a very similar manner each time you get the envelope that creates the propensity to interpret it in that way. Self-perpetuation. And that is why doing something different, not hollowly, not on the surface, not to try to trick the universe, but because you refuse to be anything less than who you are in every situation, is a completely different approach with a completely different result that then changes or transforms your tendency to continue to interpret your reality in those negative terms. And so again, to address this very specifically, you need not judge yourself or measure yourself against the standard that if you have that initial interpretation, you have failed, or you are not living your joy or passion. And your acknowledgement that it is all right to have had that interpretation, you have always acted in a particular way in a similar circumstance, and the interpretation is completely logical. Let yourself have it, but not settle for it. Not allow it to be a symbol to define yourself. Not allow it to be a symbol to decide, well, I thought I was so expanded. This envelope tells me I'm not. And therefore, the decision is I'm not. The trust is I'm not, and the actions cannot be anything but a direct reflection of the fact that you now decide you're not. And see, here's the proof.
Right.
Changing the actions will change your tendency to interpret it in that way.
We love your response. We love your response. No, but
All right.
I have when I get just to be exact about that, I'm clear on what you said, and I was really interested in that in the other response that I used to have. Now I'm going to have a different response. Before I used to look at it and say, oh, woe's me, and then after about maybe 30 seconds, I would say, wow, this is a symbol of, I'm abundant. Oh yeah, I'm abundant.
The way that you are saying that still expresses that you are humoring yourself.
I know that.
And that is vastly different from simply deciding because you know that is who you are and trusting it.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. This is really great. And it's very synchronistic because I have been getting tired of saying, oh yeah, I'm abundant. I didn't believe it, I wasn't believing myself, and I was really frustrated with that. So this is
all right. Perhaps a more constructive approach would be to pick up the envelope, allow yourself, welcome yourself to have any interpretation that you initially seem to have automatically. You're going to anyway, embrace it, invite it. Then, before you do anything, ask yourself who you desire to be. Not, oh yeah, I'm abundant. And in parentheses, but here's the symbol that tells me this is all bull. Simply redefining, redeciding, all right. Here is a symbol. I am definitely interpreting it as a reinforcement that I am not abundant. I acknowledge this, and I allow it. But I do not allow myself to continue to assign that meaning, because this is the only control I have. To not, again, taunt the universe, but assign who you are, all right? I have this. It is an expression of who I am to be able to pay these as they come in, or better yet, before they come in. Align up with who you are with what's available. It can be a reflection that you are failing, or it can be a reminder that this is not what you wish to continue to create. It is all in the interpretation. The sarcastic response is not fully committing to the positive decision. And it is still incorporating some of the atmosphere of prove it to me, universe. You keep giving me evidence that none of this works. Yeah, I'm abundant. Yeah, sure. That's the ticket.
No, all joking aside, I really have responded that I am abundant, and yet I still got to a place where I must not be believing myself.
Perhaps again, as we have discussed to some degree, your approach, though constructive, has not been consistent. And again, to use the terminology, from time to time, in a fairly regular manner, you cave.
What caves me?
You simply say, all right, the evidence is too overwhelming. I buy into the decision using the evidence rather than perpetuating the decision of who I am continuously for, again, even 3 days of your time.
Why would I personally choose to do this so much?
Excellent question. Why would you?
I've asked myself that. And
all right, this moment is anew. Why now do you do that?
To discover this magnificent abundance that I am, period.
All right.
That's what I imagine it to be. I can feel that too, yet it's still questionable to me of why I really, really need so many hurdles in my life to really believe something.
Do you feel in the process of this questioning that your response is 100% consistently positive?
I feel like asking the crowd. That's who I am. I think, well, what do I sound like? Because my ears hear something different than maybe what everybody else hears right now. So
it is my perception, with no judgment whatsoever attached, that your response alternates. I am not saying this to criticize or judge you, simply an observation. To make matters more interesting, you sometimes deny that. But there is nothing wrong with that either. Simply understanding, I wish to be consistent, I will be consistent, is all it takes to change it all.
Then I will be consistent.
Are you consistent now? Yes. Or will you be in the future?
I am consistent.
All right.
Period. That's all I need, right?
Often individuals will test their decision. When you consistently have the positive response, you will no longer seem to test your decision. The indicator that your response is not consistently positive need not be, well, everyone, what do you think?
Right.
But can simply be that indicator.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
No, perfect sense.
All right.
Really amazing. This has been a great gift for me.
It is the rule rather than the exception, but I understand what you mean.
That's great on that.
May I ask you one other question? And feel free, again, to be honest or not.
I'm hesitating.
Up to you.
Yes, you may.
I will never force you to know more of yourself.
I want to know more.
Now, I ask you this, and it is up to you to answer in any way you wish. I will take your words at their value, no matter what I sense. All right?
All right.
Do you find yourself from time to time judging yourself? Yes or no?
Yes.
All right. That also is an indicator that your response is not consistently positive. And you need not judge yourself for having a not consistently positive response. You can transform this all right now by using that fact and understanding while you're judging yourself, chances are the next thing you do won't necessarily be very positive. And in finding that you are judging yourself, the approach that assists you to transform it is to simply say again, all right, all right, all right. I'm judging myself. But I do not wish to continue to do so. I understand I have done something that apparently is not constructive and judging myself for that, and then acting from the atmosphere of that judgment. But I can simply observe that I have done that, see that it has not gotten the positive result, not do that again, and actually thank that very same action for allowing me to realign rather than judging myself. But when you judge yourself for judging, you compound it. And simply saying, all right, I've judged myself. I have the option to love myself unconditionally, to love myself conditionally, to love myself not at all. Which looks most attractive? Realignment.
Yes, realignment. I understand that. Hopefully, trustingly, we will never talk about this ever again, because right now I made the decision that I no longer, when I do judge myself, if I do, see, it's happening again.
You can use it all.
I no longer will judge myself. Yet I do expect me to judge myself.
You can use it all. And what can occur is that we can talk about it again when you are giving your testimonial from the positive. It is all right to judge yourself. Judgment can be something that lasts but a fraction of a moment. Reminding yourself that you love yourself no matter what can also be a fraction of a moment. All the indicators are there. All the interpretations may seem automatic initially, but it is the response which will create an effect which will transform it all. Different response will create different interpretation, and you will no longer judge that particular approach when you begin to walk in step with who you know yourself to be. And if you cave, big deal.
Right.
Don't harp upon it unless you wish to carry around and perpetuate the results of the judgment.
Understood.
All right, you could sound a bit more excited about it.
I'm very excited. I'm excited to get the tape and really listen to it.
Ah, the tape. All right.
Because I am sitting here and my head's just buzzing.
Perhaps again, this is a bit too simple, but this is the level at which we choose to communicate. Consolidation, simplification. Again, as I have said, decision, trust, and action are really one thing. And for now, to simply stay focused, your action is the expression of your decision and your trust in any given moment. And that is what you can control. That is what you have the choice to express in any way, in any moment, no matter what.
Wow. Yes, thank you.
All right.
May I ask you one quick question?
No.
That was beyond that. Not an outer galactic question.
He will anyway. Proceed.
Real quickly, there's lots of things to talk about, obviously, but
Time's up.
no. I went on the trip out to Sedona, and there was a lot of interesting things that happened, of course. One dream pops in my mind, though, that I had while I was at this place called Argosanti, which is out in the middle of nowhere, basically. And I was dreaming that there was this fire in the place, in the building. And there was a lot of smoke. And then all of a sudden, the spaceship lands, and Andrew's there. And Andrew says, "Wait, don't leave without me." So all of a sudden, he beams up and disappears. And then I go up and find out that there's no fire. It was just a bunch of smoke. Now, I don't know why I was thinking of him. I don't know where this came from, but it was of interest to me and perhaps the channel. So I would like to know your interpretation of that.
Simply that when you are willing to dig deeper and open your eyes wider, you will find that many of the negative interpretations that you assign are simply inaccurate. There is no fire.
Yeah. What about the spacecraft and Andrew? Is he sharing? I took the interpretation as he was sharing that idea with me, that fire is transformation to me, and that there's a lot going on with that.
Understood. But it was your negative interpretation that created the reaction that you have shared with me.
Okay.
And that we are, in many ways, discussing right now.
Okay. All right.
The symbol, again, loosely speaking of what you refer to as the spaceship, simply can represent In this instance, the removal of your power from yourself, the assumption that you do not contain it all, and that there is an external power through which you can gain your power. But the fire, the smoke, the house, Andrew, the craft are all you.
Right. Okay.
I thank you.
Thank you very much.
Shedding. Female.
Elan?
Me?
Which one?
You pick. It's your world.
Elan?
Ace.
I had something to just share about what I interpreted after perceive, assess, interpret, and then pause, and then respond. My pause comes in a listening, and it's just another word for pause, I think, is I like to listen. I've been experiencing a lot with listening lately, and noticing that when I want to immediately respond in a negative way or in an unconscious way, I decide instead to listen to what's deeper, or what I heard with my true self ears, with my heart, with my grounded conscious being.
And what do you find to be the effect of this approach?
Well, very positively, the person or the incoming message feels value, because I'm actually listening to that person and feeling the impact of their words or their input.
Do you find in any given situation that when you are willing to listen in such a way, that you are very effortlessly able to reinterpret what they are saying according to your positive approach?
Absolutely. So, yeah.
You mean to tell me it's that simple?
Oh, yeah. And I'm really curious about why my ears are having so much itchy sensation all the time lately, and have thought about it's just reminding me to keep the listening going on. And do you have any more input on the ear thing?
You have nailed it down rather well. And simply your willingness to continue to listen will allow you to hear more of yourself, not necessarily the other individual.
Yeah.
For other individuals are simply reflections, your versions of them, that will always be completely appropriate to reinforce whatever you are exploring.
Okay.
And therefore, again, your willingness to consciously continue to listen will, in that sense, transform any physical reminders to do so. Have you not found that this has begun to cease already? All right.
All right. I had lots of dreams of water beings lately, and I wondered if you have any information of from Dreamer and from our ocean friends. And
simply, it is their perception that you are all doing just fine. All right? Swimmingly. But the idea is that they acknowledge your willingness and can detect on what you call a mass level a tendency or a shift in that sense. Do not necessarily always assume what you are perceiving as water beings are what you call the dolphins upon your planet, though sometimes they are. There have been an instance or two where you have swam in your dreams with members of my own society.
yeah. Okay. The other night was a green horse was swimming, coming out of the ocean to visit me.
All right. How creative.
Very interesting. Thank you, Elan. Nice speaking with you.
Oh, thank you. Other female.
Elan?
Ace.
Really what I wanted was a clarification.
All right, proceed.
I think that the 3-day thing is really valuable, but I think that we make responses from, all day long, and thousands of responses, and that is it okay to positively respond to something yet still state your preference? Say, okay, well, I would prefer that you didn't do that, but in that tone, yeah, well, in a positive way, but still saying, I prefer that you didn't do that.
Absolutely. And we were not suggesting that your response should squelch things that you know are true for you to communicate. Only that no matter what you are impelled to communicate, there is always, always, always a positive way to express it.
Okay.
And perhaps part of the challenge may seem to be to use your creativity, and you will in fact amaze yourself to the degree that you can express anything in empowered, positive, and unconditionally loving terms. Anything.
I think that's true. I mean, I've been thinking of the word responsibility a lot, and I can be responsible for a lot of people at one time, for their children and for their well-being. And I think it's very important to know that you can respond in a certain way, saying that, well, that's not appropriate or whatever, but still come across in a positive way.
All right. I understand that it may at times seem laborious, but rather than saying that is not appropriate, particularly when you are referring to what you call children, perhaps the more positive explanation of what is and why will serve the same purpose and keep it in the positive response vein.
I think that you're right. That's true. Thank you. And another thought with being, the whole response able is that you also can't be responsible for how someone interprets what you're saying.
Absolutely not. But when your intention is consistently positive, your reality reflects that back to you. And if certain individuals are unwilling to match that vibration, your interactions with them, your relationships with them will transform. But more often, perhaps than not, you will find that when you are willing to put yourself out in that way, you invoke that aspect in another or the other person and find in general that you reach what you call agreement. Not necessarily that you need to conform, but that there is a workable agreement in any situation, particularly with the people that you attract what you call most closely. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it all does. Thank you. Just one other quick clarification. The 3-day thing, and then you said something about 3 weeks. Now, 3 days, you'll notice the difference.
3 days, you will notice an obvious difference that will perhaps inspire you. One moment. All right. 3 days, you will notice enough compelling result to effortlessly continue and see the obvious constructive value. 3 weeks at the onset, at the longest, will provide a complete sweeping transformation, visible in all aspects and relationships of your life.
That's really exciting. Thank you.
It is, and it demonstrates the small change that results in the sweeping transformation. We generally refrain from such concrete, finite designations. In this case, as an average, however, this demonstrates the short time frame in which you can have the results that you seek when you choose to play along the gradient, whereby your actions create in the physical world results. And it is exciting. And it is the former, so to speak, 3 weeks that have resulted in whatever you are seeming to have a tendency to interpret right now. So not only will it work, so to speak, it does work, it has worked. All right?
Mm-hmm.
I thank you. Sharing. Hey, Smail.
I have a friend who hears a hum. She's been hearing it for about 5 years, and there are other people who have this problem also. It's a very low frequency hum. And they've been told that it comes from the earth or from electromagnetic waves in general. And it causes lack of sleep, pain.
Understood.
Do you know anything about it? Can you tell me anything?
The idea is simply this. Your planet, as does any planet, and in fact individuals and any expression of consciousness in a physical reality particularly vibrates at a certain rate. When you are synchronized to that rate, you do not notice it. When you are, in that sense, not quite in sync with that particular rate, you can notice the difference. And so therefore my particular, shall I say, suggestion to that and any individual who have such an experience would be the idea of creating what you call a meditative approach, whereby you use that sound to synchronize yourself to that vibration. Using the presence of that sound to shift your own vibration, using the presence of that sound and the changes that occur within it as you shift as feedback.
I've actually suggested something like that to her, and I thought maybe this was a transitional experience that she was having, because she seems to be in a transition point, a point of great change, and it all coincides together. However, when I, in a hypnotherapy session, told her to focus on the sound, it caused great pain.
Understood. But the idea is not so much to focus upon it as to notice it as she shifts herself to see whether it intensifies or, as you say, disappears. That is her feedback to gauge her particular, perhaps you can say, vibrational emanation, similar to what you call biofeedback.
How could she change her vibrational emanation?
Simply through the idea of understanding that her vibration is the result of, again, her decisions, trust, and action, and that her decision to simply align to the vibration is in and of itself enough to begin to hear a change, which then allows her, again, the opening to continue that change. It is a subtle thing, but it starts with the acceptance of the idea that her vibration is a statement of who she is and not the other way around.
So it's not an alien, negative, absolutely negative thing that she believes. That's probably what creates the worsening of the situation.
One moment. Attaching that definition in many ways prolongs the effect. That interpretation and subsequent response perpetuates the very phenomena.
Understood.
It is not, by the way, my perception that that is the cause. And so she will utilize whatever feedback you share from me, and it is up to her whether she will use that to pivot or not. Generally speaking, were that the case, I would be aware of it, at least on some level.
And so all the other people on the planet who experience this are experiencing generally the same type of phenomenon.
There can be nuances that there are as many of as individuals, but generally speaking, there is a commonality. There are other reasons, but to stick to the subject for now, that will do.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Sharing.
Elan,
Ace, female.
would you be willing to answer a question about implants?
Perhaps.
I have an eye infection, and I was working with a friend of mine who's a healer the other day. We exchanged healing services, and when we went into the eye, what we thought that we found were implants, and they were...
One moment. In yourself?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Matter of fact, I will actually say absolutely not. Not in the way you are assuming. You may be implanting or superimposing ideas, but there is no physical barrier, no.
So these would be energy. The effect of... Let me ask it.
Put it this way. The idea, the terminology implant infers that something was put there from another source. Except that it is an idea that you are exploring and emanates from you, that gives you the power back to transform it.
The idea in these, then, calling it whatever you would want to call it, they were they would be energy forms, and they were dark, and the effect of it was that it was keeping me from fully expressing myself and fully expressing my power. So in view of what you're saying, another level of understanding of that is that I created that or invited that.
Perhaps you are using it as a symbol to increase your awareness and simply decide anew. Yes.
Some of it was when I was 3 years old in this lifetime, life became very difficult and maybe kind of dangerous for me. So certain things happened that would prevent me from calling that much attention to myself from my parents, for example. And so that was part of it that we lifted off during this session. Actually, a couple of sessions. And others were ones I perceived that were from other lifetimes and did have, in one case, had an extraterrestrial attachment to it. But I guess I am opening, I really want to explore the whole idea.
All right. Allow me to add simply one more thing.
Yeah.
One moment. Another would be, at least up until this point, the assumption that there was external influence. And that is the key, perhaps the last key, to allow you to transform it. Understanding that it is not. And not relying on that explanation, interpretation, decision, response.
Would you just repeat that so it sets in my mind?
The assumption that there is an implant in and of itself. Perhaps for now we can simply continue to comment only in your instance. All right?
Yeah.
I thank you.
Thank you.
Female.
Thank you for the subject matter tonight. It has clarified much.
Well, thank yourself.
98%.
Ah, down to 2.
Yeah,
All right.
98%. I had an incident today, a situation, and used the pause feature quite a bit. I didn't understand it until tonight. So, and I thought I was backing out of the situation, and I wasn't.
Simply reassessing.
Definitely.
All right.
And I don't know where I stand with it, though, because I think we both walked away with our own opinions. So I don't feel it's been resolved. But I felt that I had been positive with it, even though I walked away with my opinion and she walked away with hers.
The idea of interacting with another individual need not be to impose your point of view, but simply your responsibility is to simply, as we had discussed earlier, clearly, and perhaps if you wish to be conducive, unconditionally loving and positively expressing it. What the other person does with it is now out of the realm of your responsibility. And in fact, your role is, if you wish to be most accurate, done with. You have a perception. It is unique to you. You have attracted a situation. You are there for a reason. The reason is to simply make the communication of who you are. And if you are willing to not attach yourself to any particular result that may occur to it, you have been responsible to the individual. When you begin to insist that they change their opinion, that they dovetail their opinion to yours, that is where you have crossed the line of being responsible, or shall I say, attempting to be responsible for them. So, when you communicated clearly who you were, your job was over.
I don't know that I communicated it completely because I was on pause quite a bit.
All right. But the idea is now you are entertaining many of these ideas. Now you are attracting the terminology, the methodology to do so now and what you call forward.
It was quite beautiful.
All right.
Establishing that new template. I really enjoyed that. I didn't understand it until tonight. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for jumping the gun. There will be but a few more interactions. Sharing.
Elan.
Yes.
Elan, a few years ago, this is in the way of a testimonial and a question.
All right.
A few years ago, I reported difficulties that I had with a woman in the community I lived with, where I was afraid of her, I was trying to avoid her. You suggested I have lunch with her. I had lunch with her. I invited her to lunch and we had lunch. and actually it transformed my relationship with her. And out of it actually came a whole new idea of which I have a business. This began as a travel agency for older people, allowing them to travel in places where they wouldn't be able to without the service.
So alternating your response actually created the opposite result from what you have gotten with your original response, yes?
Yes.
All right. What's the question?
180 degrees. Well, the question is the excitement to ask her out to lunch. It was not exciting at that point to say, you know, will you come have lunch with me? It was more like, oh my God, okay, well, I'll do this, you know. And the excitement then opened up after having lunch with her. And then the excitement of getting the idea for this travel agency, well, it was exciting, but the idea of making the calls and the inquiries wasn't so much, but having made them, the excitement build. And making the further steps, although not necessarily exciting, as I did them, the excitement keeps building and I find more things to act on and do. As the momentum continues, it builds and builds and the excitement is unfolding. But in the initial actions that I took, there's not necessarily the excitement that preceded them. And oftentimes in the language which I've heard you articulate, you know, follow your excitement. From my perspective, it seems like, you know, do what you think will work to make a difference, and the excitement will fill you up.
That is, shall I say, another approach, but it does not negate that if indeed you do follow your excitement from moment to moment to moment, that the same thing will not occur, and perhaps often far more effortlessly and serendipitously. But I had never suggested that by doing certain things according to obligation, that you would not create any opportunities for excitement. It is simply another way to go about it. Perhaps I might point out, when you mention that you were not excited to have lunch with her, what was the emotion that you experienced? Anxiety.
Anxiety, yes.
The flip side of excitement. Excitement with a negative interpretation.
Yes.
So even so, there is still that understream of excitement and the idea that you now have the ability to interpret it, to observe, to explore whether or not that feeling is simply you telling yourself, this is absolutely not me, or this feeling is saying, well, I'd like to do this, but I'm frightened of the result. It is a fine line and an excellent distinction to be made in many of the discussions that we have had. I thank you for bringing it up, but do you understand what I am saying? And does that fit?
Yes, well, I am going to listen to the tape because I think I was blanking out there for a moment.
May I ask you another question? All right. You mentioned that you were not excited to make the calls and the contacts, yes?
Yes.
What did you feel?
There was anxiety.
All right.
And so I understand that the excitement was there with the fear, commingled, and I can accept that there was excitement.
Perhaps it is when you feel absolutely nothing that you can understand that it is not representative of who you are. But if you are willing to look at your anxiety and try on, sample a positive interpretation and see how that feels, you can often show yourself that it is excitement.
Okay. The other aspect of this, I guess, or testimonial part, is that in some of these other projects that have been exciting for me, like the Our Earth project, I think I brought this up to you, connecting kids with the environment, where I've been able to, and I've been taking more consistent action to make contacts where I can, take action where I can. It seems to be unfolding and spreading and building up momentum very quickly.
All right.
So I would put that in as like, it does work.
When you acted upon the ideas that you were interpreting yourself as having an anxiety reaction to, and then a result was achieved, you then began to trust your excitement and feel it as excitement.
Yes.
But were you to say to me, I had no emotion, no charge, then I would have questioned you further as to whether you really had those results. So again, this is the issue of the interpretation of that vibration. In negative terms, anxiety; positive terms, excitement.
Yeah, there was a charge there, for sure. It was not a blank.
All right. I thank you.
Thank you.
Lon.
Female.
Hi, Lon.
And to you, greetings.
Good to hear you again.
And you as well.
I've gotten involved with the emergency medical system, and I'm working in an ambulance, and I'm really dealing with what you were just discussing. I'm very excited about it, but I have a lot of anxiety. And even though I think about it and understand all the reasons that I shouldn't have anxiety, I still do.
Perhaps in your situation, part of the anxiety that you are creating, aside from being the flip side of excitement, also relates to your compassion. But perhaps not necessarily assigning the full power to the individual that you assign to yourself. In other words, assuming them to be the victim, so to speak. Do you understand what I am saying?
Hmm?
Your willingness to grant them the power to create the circumstances that you witness, understanding that it is perhaps slightly a negative expression, can be the hinge.
I have thought of that.
All right. Have you done it?
Yeah, I have. When we've lost a patient, I haven't felt bad about it. I felt that it was how they wanted it to be, and we co-created it.
All right. And what are other instances in which you, in that sense, create that anxiety?
Well, when I'm going to be on duty, I always have this terrible feeling of anxiety. I just don't like the way it feels.
Do you anticipate that you will see pain and suffering?
That doesn't bother me.
All right. Interesting. It might bother me.
That's not what I'm anxious about.
All right. Define what you feel you are anxious about. Do you feel that no matter what occurs, you will be of service?
Yes, I do.
Are you sure?
Well, I must not be sure. I would be anxious.
Not necessarily. Describe the feeling of anxiety more precisely.
It's painful. It's just
Allow me to rephrase. What do you feel you are anxious about?
maybe I'm afraid I won't be adequate for the situation,
All right. To some degree, yes.
which is certainly a distinct possibility.
Not really. It is my perception that no matter what, you will respond accordingly and appropriately. Are you willing to grant yourself the same respect?
Yeah.
There goes the anxiety.
Well, I know I've said these things to myself, but I still get this anxiety.
All right. Again, do understand that you are passionate about what you are doing. You are excited about what you are doing. And you can simply note how you feel and remind yourself, align yourself to why you are there, what you are doing, and that you would not have attracted the situation, nor would any other individuals that attracted you unless you were absolutely the perfect reflection in that situation. And that may, as you say, alleviate some of the self-created pressure.
Yeah.
Play with that.
I will. I thought everything you've said tonight has been helpful.
Oh, thank you. Thank yourself. When I say thank you, I mean it. Thank you. All right? Male. All right? Other male.
Elan, it seems that fundamental to truly believing that you can
create your own reality is to accept and believe that you're really here by choice.
I would concur.
Amongst many, there's the desire to ascend, which is actually to move, in their definition, from a physical reality to a non-physical, more expanded reality.
And as we have shared, often as an escape, not completely accepting their choice, but there are other individuals who simply are, in that sense, ready. There is a distinction, though often individuals who insist they are ready are still displaying or expressing an escape hatch.
Precisely, and it's an actual denial or invalidation of the choice to be here. It seems to me that what we really want, and I'm speaking for myself, what I really want is to expand at a rate which allows me to continually experience the joy of discovering an expanding reality within a linear model, which is what I've chosen, until I've reached the point where I'm ready to experience models, different models simultaneously, because at that point, I need that to continue to be interested and continue to experience joy in the discovery of something new.
All right, do you recall us discussing with you the mechanism for determining which is which?
Please repeat.
Close your eyes. Simply state with all conviction, it is time for me to ascend or to transform to my next level of conscious expression. Have you done so? Have you said that?
Well, I thought about it.
All right. Now open your eyes. Are you still here?
Yes, but you're all different.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
But do understand it is that simple. If it is time, it will be spontaneous and effortless. If you open your eyes and it's still there, you can interpret there are other things that you have chosen to do.
I do understand that, and I understand that those that want to ascend are they're stating that absolutely they do not believe that this can work. And they are so certain about that that they want totally out of this reality. And from my point of view, I see as their life experience that this, in fact, is not working for them from their point of view. Because I see the conflict and I see the turmoil in their lives.
All right. And your point?
My point is, at some point, it would be, my point is a question. When would now be a good time to decide that you chose to be here? And then having made that choice, define who it is you choose to be, what it is you choose to experience, and act accordingly.
Rephrase the question.
It was a statement.
All right. I agree.
Forget the question.
Is that all?
That is all.
You are correct, sir. That is all. Simply the realization and decision to consciously take your ability to respond and use it, period. There's gold and then there are hills. You will understand what I am saying. Male.
Elan.
Ace. Finally. Duker number 2.
I'm ready.
All right.
For some time, I've been dying to bring up a certain subject with you. No, I've been living.
Oh, thank you.
Talk to you about time.
You know me well enough that you would not have gotten away with that one.
So,
all right, but I must say, I regret there will not be enough time to discuss this. Good night. Proceed. Time.
So often you remind us that we create time to exist. And I need all the help you can give me to understand
what is the other choice? What's the alternative? On Esthasani, do you have no time?
We have what you would call a more loosely defined relationship with time. We still create the idea of a series of events, but they do not necessarily occur in the way that you perceive them in your reality. Not necessarily do they always go in a straight line. Not always does what you call the flow of time necessarily play out in a consistent term.
Is that your gradient idea?
We, in that sense, do not so much express it in a gradient as I have been discussing with you, as we do express it as a choice, a method, a style of consciousness creation.
Do things happen in parallel rather than in a linear sequence in Esthasani?
Often, yes. Sometimes they can occur in what you would refer to or perceive as backward time, but I will not go into that.
But your children mature, grow up, eventually pass out of their physical form, and that's the passage of time.
That would be your observation, yes. Again, there are things that I have not gotten into about our perception of time because they would simply be confusing. And simply in that sense, perhaps you can say not translate very well. But basically speaking, that is our loose association of time, in that we can create it in the way that you are accustomed to. That is an option. That is, perhaps you can say, not completely accurately, but a mainstream approach. We do have the idea of what you call parallelism, whereby, for instance, just to use one simple example, you create yourselves a very finite, discrete relationship to time, where your apparency is that you can focus on one thing at a time. If there are two sounds occurring, you generally focus in on one, and the other is in the background, not really relevant. You know it's there, but you are not getting information from it. Your attention is on one. You choose, you then focus your attention, pinpoint one idea. Same thing with what you call sight. For instance, your physical eyes. If you have something in the foreground, something in the background, rather than perceiving them both and drawing relevant, parallel information from both, you focus on one, seemingly at the cost of the other. So if you focus on something in the foreground, what you call the background becomes blurry or irrelevant. If you focus on the background, the opposite occurs. What is in the foreground seems to be blurry or irrelevant. We can focus on both, not only with our physical senses, but also with our consciousness, and can therefore think in what you might refer to as parallel terms, where we can have many lines of thought going on simultaneously, which in many ways, and one way to look at it, create chords or harmonics of thought. But again, this does get complicated in the way that your approach of one thing at a time, with everything else being irrelevant till you shift your focus, is so much different from the idea of this parallelism that it doesn't translate completely. But if you would imagine being able to see something in the foreground and in the background, simultaneously deriving equal amounts of usable information for both, simultaneously making decisions about both, simultaneously responding to both. This begins to illustrate some of the difference in our approach. When we interact with you through a physical channel, we use your approach to communicate with you in the way that you are accustomed. But from my end, I have a parallel interpretation if I wish. I do have the ability, by the way, to focus on one thing at a time, but I have a parallel interpretation of what's going on. So you may think, I'm speaking to you, I'm speaking to this one, I'm speaking to that one. I may perceive all the conversations going on at the same time, making perfect sense to me on all levels. And that is the slightly different, perhaps from your point of view expanded, but simply more, not qualitatively different, simply more quantitatively of our particular approaches. This is, in a sense, one of the things that allows us to have a telepathic society. For if everyone is in touch, there must be some method to interpret all of these impulses of consciousness. And our approach allows us to do so.
Well, you have 250 million people approximately on SSonic. Are you telling me you can be aware of what's going on with each one of them at the same time?
To some degree, though, generally there will be some that will appear in the background, irrelevant. We will only focus on what is relevant to what we are exploring, similar to yourself.
Well, in a sense, can you live more than one life at a time?
Already are. But my apparency from my point of view in my physical life right now is that this is the only life.
Well, there's been the idea that all realities exist simultaneously. Does that?
We are able to, perhaps you can say, process and make sense of more of them simultaneously than you. But this is only because of your choice. You can shift this. Again, we generally refrain from going into this because it gets confusing. But it allows you to get an idea of what is available. It allows you to get an idea of another option of style of consciousness expression. And so we accept the timing of your question to express to you aspects of our consciousness that we have not necessarily discussed before. And I thank you.
Well, is your capability that you're describing characteristic of fourth density?
It is an option available, a style available in fourth density. What you refer to as fourth density, a more expanded expression of consciousness, again, not any better, simply different, has a plethora of options. Ours is but one. Technically, again, to not confuse you, I know this word throws monkey wrench in works, an infinite number. But let's keep it concrete.
I wonder, I get confused when I try to imagine, well, we create time to exist, and what are you telling us you've got that's different? And you've been very helpful. I appreciate that. I got one last question here, and that is, have I already lived my life somehow or other, and now I'm doing it again?
Well, that is one way to look at it. But you are stating it from a linear, one-at-a-time point of view. From another point of view, you're living all these lives simultaneously, parallelly. From another point of view, everything simultaneously exists right now. And you can see how when we expand these explanations, they simply may confuse you.
I want to pick the one where I'm having the most joy all the time.
Perhaps, only a suggestion. You might simply assume that is where you are sitting right now. And that is why you are sitting there.
I'm feeling good.
All right. I thank you.
Thank you so much.
At this timing, allow me to thank you all for allowing us to bring these interactions to a new level. We have always called them interactions because it is the actions that speak the loudest, so to speak. We do not insist that you do anything that we ever share. We simply trust that the timing of our sharing it with you corresponds to your timing automatically, by convention, synchronistically. And therefore, you will always continue to attract whatever reflections allow you to explore whatever is relevant to you. It may seem right now like one thing at a time. You will find that to change. I thank you and bid you a most fond and loving
Thank you.
good evening.
Thank you.